Hi, everybody. This is a continuation of our series, Famous Quotes on Paul. This will be a focus on Henry W. Southworth. He was the author of To Nazareth, or Tarsus. And he had also written a book called Not on Calvary and the First Millennial Faith. So he was we'll see what position he held in the church and that denomination as well. We are now going to go into this, and this is part of my short series. Basically, I'm just occupied in a trial that, for those who are interested, it's dark today, and it'll begin or recommence on Tuesday. So I don't think the trial is going to even end then. It'll probably be postponed a couple more days after that, and it might even get postponed for a week after that for just fitting in a couple days here and there each week until it's all resolved. Anyway, but I think it's going good, but I'm not going to comment until we get to the end. And now we'll begin this reading of Henry Southworth's writings. Hi, everyone. We're going to begin with this article. It's entitled Southworth's Nazareth or Tarsus. In the section below are notable quotes from Horatio Woodburn Southworth's work, To Nazareth or Tarsus, published in 1901. While this book is set forth as a fictional dialogue between a clergyman and the man, it is an exposure of flaws in Paul's reasoning, his inability to speak clearly, and the dubiousness of the claim that Paul's words are inspired. Southworth professes love and compassion for Paul, and he seeks to exalt Jesus over Paul. And thus we find Southworth's general spirit compatible with the aims of this website, the Jesus Words Only principle. Not everything Southworth says would be the manner we would express it, nor do we agree with all his points. Instead, we provide this for general education because its few flaws do not detract from its significant merit. To appreciate the biblical proofs offered by Southworth, one can download the entire book from books.google.com at this link. You can come to our webpage, our website. You can find it under quotes of famous people, and then the article on Southworth. Or here we provide a PDF of the original pages. Okay. Incidentally, Southworth years later promoted Augustine's idea that Christ as Redeemer was, quote, buying back from Satan the God-given but misused power over man, and Christ's death was not to appease God's anger over sin. And this is in Southworth's book, Divine Love, 1911 at 20. Southworth was thereby reviving an old idea from Augustine in De Trinitate at page 21. Thus, this shows Southworth was a writer on Christian topics other than just on Paul. Biographical details are as follows. Southworth was superintendent of the Sunday school at Christ Church of Springfield, Massachusetts in the late 1800s. Other than that detail, nothing is known about him. So he appears to be what we call laity or a non-clergyman, but he is writing extensively on the topics of Christianity. Here are his interesting general quotes about Paul from his book. First is the topic I describe as Southworth's purpose in writing, page 52. I have studied that man, Saul of Tarsus, as I have never searched the life of any other man. It is a most absorbing subject. The man is speaking. And you find that he is the most complex character that I have investigated. Unreservedly, I concede him to be facile, princeps, meaning facile in principles, I believe. That's what he means. The Christian poet of the first century. Poet surely, and with all the divine madness of the poet. Let me see if I can help here with the underlining. The divine in the poetical sense, the madness we will consider in this analysis, as he said, as he laid a roll of manuscript on the study table. Yet I beg that you will recognize that in the attempt to prove that Paul's mind was disordered, and also in that which I shall say to you here to the same effect, my only sentiment is pity for his sufferings, which are so apparent. Wherever I express contempt or indignation, it is only nominally directed at him. My contempt is for those who have refused to recognize Paul's incapacity to develop a system of Christian theology, who have accepted his vagaries as divine truth and have demanded their general acceptance. It is against these alone that I make my complaint. For I recognize in him, Paul, an earnest seeker after righteousness. Nay, more, he highly attained to righteousness, for his innate revulsion to that which was unrighteous was an integral part of his nature. Yet he seems to me to have saturated with an intense egotism that gave its color to his beliefs and utterances. Next section, Paul's pride or envy caused rejection of the 12. He's talking about Paul rejecting the 12. Page 55. And the intellectual pride which he had substituted these metaphysical subtleties for the pure faith bequeathed to the simple Galilean fisherman was clearly traceable to the malign influence of an intellectual pride, which clearly had its impulse, at least its excuse, in the scholastic vanity of Saul of Tarsus, who held in such unmistakable contempt the message given to those humble attendants whom our Lord had chosen as his apostles. Page 112. By the side of this deep, placid stream of thought, you let run the wild, turgid flow of uncurbed emotion that the early chapters of Galatians display. It does not need either scholar or scientific philologist to recognize that this flow has no higher source than the heart of a man who is chafing under the keen personal disappointment. Envy of the apostles has grown almost to hate. Truth is no barrier in the unrestrained rush of chagrin and evident jealousy. Now, page 98, the heading is, I gave it Jesus' words only, where I think this is the significance of these words. Sometime the church will have the courage to accept those teachings of the Spirit, which our Lord repeatedly and so plainly emphasized, and will relegate the poet Paul to his own sphere of brilliant irresponsibility. Basically, put him to one side and focus on Jesus. Page 113. And yet the church has been so falsely true to what it has construed as a divine message that it has practically told the world that it has so little faith in the convincing power of the great underlying truths of Christianity that it does not dare to eliminate these statements of a disordered mind, statements that might be ignored if they did not deny important truths. I think what he's saying is they're only paid attention to because they deny important truths. So we hold on to them for the wrong reason. Answer to Paul's claim to inspiration, page 115 to 16. Now remember, there's two people speaking in this soliloquy, if you will. It's really an author writing one book, but he has the clergyman and then he has the man. The clergyman asserts Paul's claim to inspiration. Here we go. The clergyman is speaking in the story. No, not a semblance of support, the clergyman said. A divine hand reaches down and grasps it through the revelation vouchsafed to St. Paul, that which you condemn, that my gospel which he received, not with flesh and blood, but by direct inspiration, was his authority. And to this the man answered, when a Mormon elder can obtain an additional wife only by receiving a revelation, when to a Coman pontiff a coveted additional power can only come through a revelation, or when a Paul must witness the collapsing of the chain of reasoning upon which his whole system of dogma is dependent, unless he can fasten its first link to a revelation, we have a right to consider the frailty of human nature and to recognize that an intense and longing contemplation of any object of absorbing interest makes the mind, especially a mind so ready to entertain visions as was St. Paul's, unfitted to discriminate between actual revelation and a conviction founded on a believed need of establishing a cherished theory. To my mind, it is illogical to claim that our Lord should have left any important element of his mission to be developed at a later period by any method so unreliable through opportunities of deception and dangers of self-deception as are revelations. For my part, I find a sufficiency in that which our Lord alone has taught, and I can find no compensation for the undermining effect of the flood of revelations which have had their inceptions from Paul. I think that's one of the best quotes in this whole book. Paul's negative influence on morality, pages 59 to 60. To this the man replied, any really great leader must be master of himself, and nothing could be more confusing in our attempts to establish the moral responsibility of each individual than is Paul's statement that he was possessed by an influence independent of himself that impelled him to do wrong contrary to his intent. And he's citing Romans 7:1. So it is no more I that do it, the evil, but sin in me that dwells. Romans 7, verse 25. So then I myself with my mind serve the law of God, but with the flesh the law of sin. Yes, he does seem to have a completely schizophrenic belief that he's out of control and when he sins. Let's go back to that asterisk. So there it is. Hence, if we were to allow generally this shifting of moral responsibility through the attributing the culpability for sin to an external power, either personal or impersonal, which was not simply an influence, but an irresistibly impelling power, we should lower moral standards through weakening of individual responsibility. Thus, Paul's influence did not make for moral conditions. Paul's influence was certainly bad in this respect. I do not forget that elsewhere, indeed almost immediately, Paul takes an entirely contradictory attitude. But this is another instance of that vacillation which adds to our confusion and adds to our distrust of the man, of his doctrines, and of the validity of his claims to inspiration. Paul may have caused, surely furnished the palliation of the Manichaean tenet of inherent evil in the flesh. In our estimate of what constitutes moral responsibility, nothing could be more confusing than are these statements of Paul, and he means Romans 7:1 and Romans 7:25. Paul is malleable; any interpretation fits. He writes on page 67, Paul's theology has two elements, the logical and the mystical, which are seldom wholly separated from each other. And it is these elements that have permitted his ideas to be so readily modified or construed or combined as to form the foundation of varied systems of theology. For Paul's variety and complexity of expression, his varying metaphors permit such varied construction that they are actually readily adaptable to any interpretation in favor of which the student is prepossessed. Next heading, Paul's doctrines contradict themselves. Page 105. As I said, these men make no demands on me. They do not tell me that I can find the way to heaven only by accepting the guidance of the disordered mind of Saul of Tarsus, one half of whose utterances it is necessary to ignore in order to believe the other half. Page 111. Will the time ever come that you will be content to each the simple creed of a natural God and a consistent gospel? For the gospel can never be consistent when you demand belief in statements diametrically opposed to one another. Paul's misuse of proof texting from the Bible, page 210. One phase of his intense self-absorption is shown in the inappositeness of his quotations from the Scriptures. It could not be from ignorance that he failed to quote them pertinently. That he had them in mind is evident, for he was constantly denouncing the law, and the denunciatory passages would have eminently attracted him. Okay, that's the end of that, and there's another link to one of his books, and I hope that helped you to just see another angle that people have. And this was a layman who was basically writing theological books. All right, God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao, bye.